The Galactic Concordance Council gathered in the great amphitheater of Xylos Prime, a place built for peace but often used for power plays. The chamber sparkled with light bent through crystal walls, casting soft rainbows across the curved benches. Delegates from 17 different species sat in neat rows, each one dressed in robes or armor or shells that marked their rank and origin. Some had feathers, others had scales, and a few were made of shifting light or smooth metal. All of them watched the center of the room where one human stood alone. His name was Ethan Cole. He was tall but not imposing, with short brown hair and calm eyes that looked straight ahead without blinking too much. He wore a plain gray uniform with no medals, no bright colors, nothing to show off. To the other delegates, he looked small, young, out of place. Humans had only left their home planet a few decades ago, and already they were sitting among the oldest civilizations in the galaxy. Many thought it was a mistake to invite them at all. Ethan had been called to explain something strange. During a recent fight near the Krell border, human ships had used a new kind of weapon. Not lasers, not missiles, not plasma beams. Instead, they had sent out a quiet hum, a sound too low for most ears to hear. Within minutes, enemy ships stopped moving. Their weapons went dark. Their engines shut down. But not a single hull was cracked. Not one life was lost. The Krell fighters floated in space like sleeping birds, confused but unharmed. The Council wanted to know why. And they wanted to know if this was a trick. Ambassador Virlak of the Thorn Collective spoke first. His voice was sharp, like stone grinding on stone. "Human," he said, leaning forward on his clawed hands. "You claim this device is peaceful, but silence can be more dangerous than fire. How do we know you are not planting control signals inside our minds?" Ethan didn't flinch. He simply turned to face Virlak and said, "We built it to stop fights, not start them." A murmur rose through the chamber. Some delegates shifted in their seats. Others tapped their claws or flicked their tails. To them, war was normal. Victory meant destruction. Mercy was a sign of weakness, or worse, deception. The idea that someone would go to battle and choose not to kill seemed foolish, maybe even insane. Leah Dawson watched from the upper gallery, her fingers tight around a slim data slate. She was Ethan's aide, young but sharp, with dark eyes that missed nothing. She knew the truth behind the sonic dampeners. They weren't magic. They weren't mind control. Earth scientists had found old alien tech in a derelict ship years ago. Tech that could disrupt energy fields. Instead of turning it into a weapon, they had spent years reworking it to be gentle, to shut things down without breaking them. It was a choice, not an accident. But the Council didn't care about choices. They cared about control. High Arbiter Zenthos stood next. He was tall, wrapped in silver robes that shimmered like liquid. His face was smooth with no mouth, just two dark slits where his eyes should be. When he spoke, his voice came from a small orb floating beside his shoulder. "Human," the orb said in a calm, even tone. "Your actions raise questions. If your tool is so harmless, why not share its design with the Concordance? Transparency builds trust." Ethan nodded slowly. "We understand that. But trust also means respecting boundaries. You wouldn't hand over your core defense codes just because someone asked. Neither will we," a few delegates hissed. Others clicked their mandibles in disapproval. To refuse a direct request from the High Arbiter was bold. Some would call it rude. But Ethan didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He just stood there, quiet and steady, like a tree in a storm. Leah's heart beat fast. She knew this moment was dangerous. The Council had the power to label humanity as unstable, untrustworthy, even hostile. If that happened, trade routes could close. Alliances could break. War might follow, but Ethan wasn't afraid. He had studied these species for years. He knew their histories, their fears, their pride. And he knew they had never met a species that walked away from victory just to save a life. That was the real shock. Not the dampeners, but the reason behind them. "We don't see enemies as problems to erase," Ethan said, his voice clear and low. "We see them as people who might one day be friends. Even in war, we try to leave the door open." Silence fell over the amphitheater. Not the kind of silence that means peace, but the kind that comes before something breaks. Then, without another word, Ethan turned around. He walked toward the exit, his boots clicking softly on the polished floor. Leah stood quickly and followed, her pulse roaring in her ears. Behind them, the Council erupted. Voices rose in confusion, anger, fear. Some shouted for guards. Others demanded emergency sessions. A few just stared stunned as if they had just seen a ghost. Outside, the air was cool and thin. Stars glittered above the dome of Xylos Prime. Ethan stopped for a moment, looking up at the sky. Leah caught up to him, breathless. Was that the right move? She asked quietly. Ethan didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the stars. They wanted us to prove we're safe by giving up our freedom. That's not safety. That's surrender, Leah nodded. She understood. Humanity had come to the galaxy not to bow but to stand, and sometimes standing meant walking away. Back inside, the council chamber was in chaos. Ambassadors argued. Advisors whispered into comms. Security drones hovered near the exits. High Arbiter Xenthos remained still, his orb dimming slightly. For the first time in centuries, the Concordance felt something unfamiliar. Doubt. And beneath that, something even stranger. Fear. Not fear of human weapons. Not fear of human ships, but fear of a species that refused to play by the rules of power. A species that chose kindness over conquest. And in a galaxy built on strength, that kind of choice was the most frightening thing of all. The news spread fast. Faster than light, faster than fear. Within hours of Ethan Cole walking out of the Galactic Concordance Council chamber, every major system in the known galaxy had heard the same shaky report. The human delegate left without warning. No explanation. No farewell. Just silence. And silence in politics is louder than any shout. Ambassador Verlac of the Thorn Collective was the first to react. He stormed out of the amphitheater, his armored tail slashing the air behind him. Back in his private quarters aboard the Thorn flagship, he activated a secure channel to his homeworld. They are hiding something, he growled into the comm. That human didn't walk away out of pride. He walked away because he knew we were close to uncovering the truth. His superiors agreed. Within the day, Thorn patrol fleets began shifting toward the outer edges of human-claimed space, just beyond the Krell border. Meanwhile, High Arbiter Xenthos remained in the empty chamber long after the others had gone. His silver robes pooled around his feet like still water. The orb beside his head glowed faintly, pulsing with slow, thoughtful light. He replayed Ethan's words in his mind. We see them as people who might one day be friends. It made no sense. In Xenthos' long life, over 300 cycles, he had never heard a warrior species speak like that. War was about dominance. Peace was just the pause between battles. But this human, he spoke as if peace was the goal, not the break. Leah Dawson sat in the small human shuttle docked at Xylos Prime's neutral port. The ship was quiet, just the hum of life support and the soft blink of status lights. Ethan stood by the viewport, arms crossed, watching the distant swirl of stars. He hadn't said much since they left the chamber. Leah knew better than to push. She handed him a ration bar, plain, no flavor, just nutrients. He took it with a nod. We're being watched, she said softly, glancing at the external sensors. 3 alien vessels had drifted closer to their dock in the last hour. None made contact. None hailed. Just watched. Let them watch, Ethan replied, chewing slowly. If they think we're scared, they'll push harder. If they think we're planning something, they'll panic. But if we do nothing, that's what confuses them most. Back on Earth, the Planetary Defense Committee met in a deep bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains. The room was cold, lit by pale blue screens showing fleet positions, diplomatic traffic, and threat assessments. General Paul Ruiz, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his left eyebrow, tapped a map showing Thorn movements. They're testing us, he said. One wrong move and they'll claim we're aggressive. Dr. Nina Patel, the lead scientist on the Sonic Dampener project, shook her head. They don't understand the tech. They think it's a weapon because they can't imagine a tool that doesn't hurt. She sighed. We built it to save lives, not scare people. But scare people it did. Across the galaxy, rumors twisted the truth. Some said humans had developed a sound that could stop hearts. Others claimed the dampeners carried hidden commands, turning enemies into slaves without them knowing. A fringe newsnet on the Velnari moon even broadcast a dramatized holo show where human ships floated silently through battlefields, leaving behind rows of frozen soldiers with blank eyes. The Concordance tried to hold an emergency session without human presence. It fell apart in minutes. The Mirren delegates argued that humanity deserved the benefit of the doubt. The Ulan freeholds reminded everyone that humans had once diverted an asteroid that would have wiped out their entire colony, without asking for payment or thanks. But the Thorn Collective and their allies shouted them down. Sentiment is weakness, Verlac declared over the comm, and weakness invites invasion. Ethan and Leah finally left Xylos Prime 2 days after the walkout. Their shuttle lifted off without fanfare, slipping past the watching ships like a shadow. No one tried to stop them. No one hailed them. It was as if the galaxy held its breath. During the long jump back to Sol System, Leah reviewed intercepted messages. Most were panicked. A merchant guild on Kessel 9 canceled all human trade contracts. A research station near Proxima shut its doors to Earth scientists. Even neutral worlds began posting warnings. Human vessels approach with caution. They're turning against us, Leah said, her voice tight. Ethan looked up from a star chart. Not all of them, just the ones who need enemies to feel strong. When they reached Earth, they were met not with blame, but with quiet resolve. The president, a woman named Carol Briggs, met them in the bunker's briefing room. She had tired eyes but a steady voice. "You did the right thing," she said. "We won't trade our values for a seat at their table." Still, preparations began. Not for war, but for defense. Human ships powered up their dampeners, not as weapons, but as shields. Engineers worked around the clock to improve the range and safety of the systems. Diplomats drafted open letters to smaller species offering data, aid, and friendship. No strings attached. Weeks passed. The silence from Earth grew heavier. No broadcasts. No demands. No threats. Just quiet readiness. And that silence began to echo in the halls of power across the stars. On Xylos Prime, High Arbiter Xenthos received a private message from an unexpected source. The Mirren Enclave. It was short. Just 3 lines. "We remember your words, human. We are watching, and we are not afraid." Xenthos read it 3 times, then he stored it in a secure archive. Deep in the Concordance vaults. He didn't share it with the others. Not yet. Back on Earth, Ethan stood on a hill outside Denver looking at the sunset. The sky was orange and pink, the air clean and cool. Somewhere out there, among the stars, a galaxy was afraid of a species that chose not to kill. He didn't smile, but he didn't look away either, because fear, he knew, was just the first step before understanding, and humanity had always been patient. The silence from Earth stretched longer than anyone expected. No official statements, no fleet movements, no emergency broadcast, just quiet. And in the galaxy, quiet was not peace, it was a warning sign. Species that had spent centuries shouting over borders now found themselves straining to hear anything from the Sol system. And hearing nothing made them nervous. On Xylos Prime, the Concordance Council met again, this time without human presence and without calm. Ambassador Verlac stood before the chamber, his claws tapping impatiently on the podium. "Their silence is a weapon," he declared. "They are waiting for us to make a mistake. While we debate, they prepare." He called for immediate sanctions, blockades on human trade lanes, expulsion from shared research networks and surveillance of all earthbound vessels. But not everyone agreed. The Mirren delegate, a soft-spoken being with skin like woven moss, raised a trembling hand. "Or," she said gently, "they are giving us time to think." Her words were met with scoffs and hisses, but they lingered in the air like smoke. Meanwhile, on a small moon orbiting the gas giant Helios 7, a group of Ulan engineers worked through the night. They had received a data packet 3 days earlier, unencrypted, unmarked, sent from an unknown source near Earth. Inside was not a weapon design or a threat, but a full schematic of a water purification system, simple and efficient, designed for low-gravity environments. At the bottom of the file was a single line: "For the colony on Ula 3, hope it helps." The Ulans had lost half their water recyclers in a solar flare last month. This gift saved lives. They didn't tell the Concordance. They kept it quiet, like a secret thank you. Back on Earth, Ethan Cole and Leah Dawson moved between secure facilities, not as diplomats anymore, but as quiet builders. They weren't planning war. They were sharing knowledge. In a lab outside Seattle, human scientists uploaded open-source designs for solar converters that worked in red dwarf systems. Tech most major powers ignored, because it wasn't flashy enough for warships. In Nairobi, engineers sent repair protocols for atmospheric scrubbers to any system that asked, no questions asked. It wasn't grand. It wasn't loud, but it was real. Leah watched a live feed from a refugee station near the Krell border. A human medical team, wearing plain white uniforms with a small blue cross, treated wounded from 3 different species, all former enemies. No one asked for IDs. No one checked allegiances. They just helped. She turned to Ethan, who stood beside her, arms crossed. "They'll never report this," she said. "Good," he replied. "Help isn't meant to be seen. It's meant to be felt." The Thorn Collective grew more aggressive. Their patrols now hovered just outside human space, scanning every cargo ship, demanding inspections. When a freighter named the Dawn Runner refused to power down its engines for a full scan, Thorn forces fired a warning shot. The bullet missed, but the message was clear. Humans were no longer welcome. Earth's response? None. The Dawn Runner simply turned around and went home. No retaliation. No protest. Just withdrawal. This confused the Thorn Command. They expected anger. They expected a show of force. Instead, they got nothing. And nothing in the language of power is the hardest thing to fight. High Arbiter Zenthos began to notice patterns. Systems that once relied on Concordance aid were now quietly turning to Earth for help. Not for weapons, not for soldiers, for seeds that grew in toxic soil, for medical drones that worked without power grids, for teaching modules that helped children learn math in broken colonies. Humanity wasn't building an empire. They were building trust, one small act at a time. Zenthos called a private meeting with his inner council, 3 elders who had served since before the last Great War. "We assumed they were naive," he said, his orb dimming slightly. "But what if they are not naive? What if they understand something we have forgotten?" One elder, her shell cracked with age, whispered, "That peace is not the absence of war, but the presence of care." On Earth, General Paul Ruiz reviewed fleet readiness reports. All ships were on standby, but not armed for attack. Their dampeners were calibrated for defense only, able to shut down hostile systems within a narrow range, but useless beyond that. "We're not hiding," he told Carol Briggs, the president. "We're showing them we don't need to hide." She nodded. "Let them wonder why we're not afraid." In the outer colonies, human freighters began carrying extra supplies, not just for their own people, but for anyone in need. A ship heading to Mars dropped food packs on a stranded Velnari mining outpost. Another left medicine on a derelict station near the Mirren border. No names, no flags, just help. The Concordance tried to spin the silence as guilt. Official broadcasts claimed humanity was in hiding, ashamed of their secret weapons. But the smaller species weren't buying it. Whispers grew in marketplaces and comm chats. The humans gave us clean water. They saved our children from fever. They didn't ask for anything back. Fear began to crack. Not all at once. Not everywhere. But in quiet corners of the galaxy, doubt crept in. Maybe the humans weren't dangerous. Maybe they were just different. Ethan stood on the same hill outside Denver watching another sunset. The air smelled like rain. Leah joined him, holding 2 mugs of hot tea. "They're scared," she said. "Good," he said, taking a mug. "Maybe now they'll listen, because the real weapon humanity carried wasn't in their ships or their tech. It was in their choice, to help even when no one was watching, to walk away from power and to stay quiet when the whole galaxy expected a roar. And that kind of strength, it didn't frighten just the Council. It changed them." The galaxy began to shift, not with explosions or declarations, but with quiet choices. Small species that had spent generations bowing to the Concordance's rules started to look elsewhere, not out of rebellion, but out of need and hope. A message arrived at Earth's outer relay station from the Mirren Enclave. It was simple, sent through an old civilian channel. "Your water filters saved our southern farms. Thank you." No title, no formal greeting, just gratitude. Ethan Cole read it in the dim light of the comms room. He didn't reply right away. He just sat for a long moment staring at the words on the screen. Then he typed back, "Glad they worked. Let us know if you need more." That exchange, small as it was, traveled, not through official channels, but through the hidden networks of traders, medics, and refugees who moved between stars like wind through trees. Soon more messages came. The Ulan Freeholds asked for help repairing a failing oxygen recycler on their 3rd moon. A group of independent miners near the Helios belt requested schematics for radiation shields that didn't require rare alloys. Each time, Earth responded, not with contracts or demands, but with files, advice, and sometimes spare parts sent on passing freighters. Leah Dawson coordinated most of it from a quiet office in Geneva. She kept no logs of who received what, no records to be used as leverage later. If we keep score, she told her team, it's not help. It's trade, and humanity wasn't trading. They were sharing. Meanwhile, the Concordance struggled to hold itself together. Without human participation, joint defense drills stalled. The shared early warning system for solar flares, once maintained by Earth's deep space sensors, began to glitch. A minor asteroid swarm near the Velnari border went undetected until it damaged 3 cargo hubs. The Velnari blamed the Concordance. The Concordance blamed the lack of human data. Tensions rose. Ambassador Verlac doubled down. He convinced 3 allied systems to join a security accord aimed at monitoring human activity. Patrols increased. Ships flying Earth colors were stopped, scanned, sometimes turned away from ports they'd used for years. But the harder the Thorn Collective pushed, the more others pulled away. The Mirrans quietly withdrew from a joint weapons project. The Ulans canceled a trade summit with the Thorn. Even neutral systems began rerouting their ships through human-friendly lanes, where inspections were quick and fair. High Arbiter Zenthos watched it all from his chamber on Xylos Prime. He said little in public meetings, but in private he studied every report. He saw how human aid flowed not to the powerful, but to the forgotten. How their tech was built for survival, not control. How their silence wasn't hiding, it was waiting. One evening he received a sealed message from an unexpected source, a young scientist on a Concordance research station near Proxima. She had been denied clearance to study human medical drones after the walkout, so she built her own, using public schematics found in old academic archives. Her note read, "It healed 23 patients with lung rot in 2 weeks. Our own medbase couldn't. Why are we afraid of this?" Zenthos saved the message. He didn't forward it. He just read it again and again. On Earth, life went on. Children went to school. Farmers planted crops under domes. Engineers tinkered in labs. But beneath the calm, the planet prepared, not for war, but for connection. New translation programs were developed to speak dozens of alien dialects. Cultural exchange modules were uploaded to public servers. Even schools began teaching basic Mirran sign language and Ulan rhythm patterns, not because they had to, but because they wanted to understand. Ethan visited a shipyard in orbit above Luna. Workers there were retrofitting old freighters with extra cargo holds, not for weapons, but for medical supplies, seeds, and clean water units. "We're not building an army," the foreman told him, wiping grease from his hands. "We're building bridges." Back in the Concordance, cracks widened. The Thorn Collective accused the Mirrans of collaborating with potential hostiles. The Mirrans responded by opening their ports to human relief ships. A standoff brewed near the Krell border when a Thorn patrol tried to block a human vessel carrying medicine to a refugee camp. The human ship didn't fight. It just stopped, powered down non-essential systems, and broadcast a live feed of the sick children waiting on the planet below. Within hours, public outcry, even among Thorn citizens, forced the patrol to stand down. Fear was losing its grip. Leah received a message from a young Mirran student. She had built a small sonic dampener for a school project, using only the public files Earth released. "It worked," she wrote, "when my teacher said it was impossible. But I did it. Thank you for showing us that kindness can be strong." Leah showed the message to Ethan. He smiled for the first time in weeks. The real change wasn't in fleets or treaties. It was in minds. Species that once saw humans as reckless newcomers now saw them as steady hands in a storm. The galaxy had expected humanity to beg for a seat at the table. Instead, they built a new table and left chairs open for anyone willing to sit. Even the Concordance's own systems began to falter without human input. Navigation beacons drifted out of sync. Emergency comms protocols failed during a solar storm near the outer rim. For the first time, the great powers realized how much they had quietly depended on Earth's quiet competence. And still, Earth said nothing. "No, we told you so, no demands for apology. Just continued help, steady and sure." In the end, it wasn't force that changed the galaxy. It was consistency. It was showing up day after day with open hands and no hidden knives. The Council had feared humanity because they didn't understand them. Now slowly they were beginning to see humanity wasn't a threat. They were a mirror, and in that mirror the old powers saw their own hunger for control and wondered if there was another way. Ethan stood on the observation deck of the orbital station, watching Earth spin below, blue-green alive. He knew the hardest part wasn't over, but for the first time he felt something like hope. Not loud, not flashy, just there like a heartbeat. 6 months after the walkout, Ethan Cole returned to Xylos Prime. He came alone in the same gray uniform, carrying nothing but a small data crystal in his pocket. The shuttle that brought him docked at the neutral port without fanfare. No escort, no announcement, just a human stepping onto the polished floor of a place that had once doubted him. The amphitheater was full. Every seat taken. Delegates sat in silence as he walked down the center aisle, his boots making soft sounds against the smooth stone. Some watched with suspicion, others with curiosity. A few, like the Mirren delegate, gave small nods of quiet respect. High Arbiter Xenthos stood at the center platform, his silver robe still, his orb glowing with a steady, calm light. Ambassador Veerlach sat rigid in his seat, claws curled tight. He had expected a fleet, a demand, a threat, not this quiet man walking in like he belonged. Ethan stopped at the center of the chamber. He didn't bow. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood there, calm and steady like he had the first time. High Arbiter Xenthos spoke first. His orb floated forward slightly, its voice soft but clear. "You left without explanation." Ethan nodded. "We left because you stopped listening. You saw a young species and assumed ignorance. But humanity has learned that strength isn't measured in firepower. It's measured in choices." A murmur moved through the room, but no one interrupted. "We didn't build the dampeners to control," Ethan continued. "We built them to protect, to give everyone a chance to walk away from the edge, even our enemies." He reached into his pocket and placed the small crystal on the floor between him and the Arbiter. It glowed faintly, pulsing with stored data. "This contains full schematics of the sonic dampeners, how they work, how to build them, how to use them safely. It's yours, freely, no strings, no demands, just trust." Silence fell again, deeper this time. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of awe. Veerlach stood suddenly, his voice sharp. "Why would you give this away? What do you gain?" Ethan turned to him. "Peace, understanding, maybe even friendship. But mostly we gain the chance to show you that not every gift comes with a hidden cost." The Mirren delegate rose slowly. Her moss-like skin shimmered in the chamber light. "We have already used your designs," she said gently. "To heal, not to harm, and it worked." Others began to speak then, not in anger but in wonder. The Ulan representative shared how human water filters had saved 3 villages on their dry moon. A miner from the Helios belt described how Earth's radiation shields kept his crew alive during a solar storm. One by one, voices that had once been silent now spoke up, not to accuse but to thank. High Arbiter Xenthos stepped forward and picked up the crystal. He held it in his smooth hands, studying its light. Then he looked at Ethan. "You could have used this as leverage, as power." "I could have," Ethan said. "But then I'd be no different from those who only see others as tools." Xenthos turned to the chamber. "This changes everything," he said. "Not because of the technology, but because of the choice behind it." The talks resumed that day, not as an interrogation, not as a trial, but as a real conversation. Delegates asked questions about human ethics, about how they trained their soldiers to show mercy, about how they built systems that served life instead of control. Ethan answered each one plainly, without pride, without fear. Leah Dawson watched from the gallery just as she had months before, but this time her hands were relaxed. Her breath was calm. She saw something new in the room. Respect. Not forced. Not fake. Earned. Over the next few weeks, the concordance began to change. New protocols were drafted, rules that valued restraint as much as strength. Joint projects were restarted, this time with open access and shared credit. The Thorn Collective, though still wary, agreed to a joint border patrol with human ships, using dampeners to de-escalate conflicts instead of firing first. Earth didn't ask for a permanent seat. They didn't demand apologies. They just showed up, ready to help, ready to listen. Back on Earth, children played under open skies. Farmers harvested crops in fields once thought too damaged to grow anything. In labs and schools and shipyards, people worked not for glory but for the quiet joy of making things better. Ethan returned home after the talks ended. He stood again on the hill outside Denver, watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and red. Leah joined him, handing him a cup of tea. "They understand now," she said. "Some do," he replied. "Others will take longer. But that's okay. We're not in a hurry. Because humanity had never wanted to rule the galaxy. They just wanted to belong in it. Not as conquerors, not as beggars, but as neighbors. And sometimes the bravest thing a species can do is walk away from a fight and leave the door open for peace." The council had been frightened before, not by weapons, not by fleets, but by a simple idea. That kindness could be strong. Now slowly, they were learning it wasn't just strong. It was the strongest thing of all.